All right, comrades, it has come to a conclusion. The end of the Russian Revolution. So, Lenin does his best effort in human history to achieve true communism. I'll tell you, this guy tried so hard. I read some of his journals and some of the documents he wrote back when I was in college. And interesting thing, this guy was a super micromanager. Like, people who were assistant factory workers in a factory in Volgograd would send him a letter, be like, "Hey Lenin, what should I do in this situation?" And Lenin would be working 20-hour days answering these individual letters from individual people. Like, Lenin really should have just created some kind of organization of thousands of people working under him that could address these concerns. But Lenin wanted everything to be done his way. And that's just exhausting. And yeah, Lenin was in charge of Russia for a couple years, but it was definitely taking a toll on his health. Because, and I remember this was sort of his expression, he was like, "I understand communism. I understand how this should work. Why does everyone else have a problem with it?" And well, other people just weren't as educated as him. Everybody thinks in a different way, and he was just really upset that people continued to be greedy, which is, hey, that's the reality of human nature, I'm going to argue. So, boom, now I gotta just click this again. There we go. Okay, so Lenin decides the common people are just too stupid to properly share resources in real communism. Because Karl Marx talked about this great society where everything was just shared, everybody got along. So he decided that he'll create a new style of communism. Lenin's style is called the dictatorship of the proletariat. And if you remember, the proletariat is kind of like the poor people. So he's saying the poor people will control the whole country. The government, the government controls the country. And for the rest of Russian history, this communism is just really kind of dictatorship socialism. They never get to communism. Communism should be everyone shares everything. But for the rest of the Soviet Union's history, they're going to keep talking a big game about communism, but in reality, they're just dictatorship socialism. They're saying the common people are too dumb to share, so we're going to put a gun to their head and we're going to control how things are shared. But you know what? We might end up with more than the common people. So it's a really nasty form of government that lies to people saying they are communist when in reality they're socialist. So there you go. Okay, we told you so. Well, Carl, that's capitalism down the toilets. When do you think we'll see the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat? There you go. Okay, so Lenin starts getting sick. He starts getting tired. It's really frustrating for him doing all this work. And Trotsky, his number one general, is sort of seen as his successor, his kind of second in command. And if you remember from my last video, like, Trotsky murdered everybody. Trotsky also made a whole lot of enemies while he was the commander of the Red Army, and especially he made an enemy with a guy named Joseph Stalin. I'll talk about him on the next slide. So let's learn about Trotsky. So Trotsky was a Jewish dude, okay, founded the Red Army, and definitely told people to just eat each other. He promoted cannibalism at times. So there were some starving peasants during the Civil War. They asked Trotsky for help, and Trotsky said this: "You are starving? This is not famine yet. When your woman starts eating their children, then you may come and say you're starving." So, wow, this guy's hardcore. Leon Trotsky: "The end justifies the means, as long as there is something that justifies the ends." He believed in communism at all costs, and he's going to pay all the costs. Okay, so now let's talk about good old Joe here. I remember when I taught this lesson one time, a girl's like, "He's a handsome guy." It's like, well, he's actually one of the greatest mass murderers in history. So, Joseph Stalin, he did not get along with Trotsky, but he probably was the number 3 guy in the Soviet Union. And he was just the cruelest Soviet commander. He used a lot of brutal, crazy tactics against people. He was sort of like the hitman of the early Soviet Union. And in fact, I think as a young man, he was trained as a priest, but he got kicked out of priest school because he was so evil and bad. And then he went and robbed banks for a while. And once they saw that he was an effective criminal, the Soviets recruited him and he rose the ranks of their leadership. Stalin's name literally translates to man of steel. Supposedly in his entire life, he never smiled, not even when his children were born. Holy cow. And here's another rule. Death solves all problems. No man, no problems. Man, Stalin's just hardcore. I'm also going to share a story about Stalin. I know this is out of sequence in history, but this story is amazing. So, Stalin had 4 children, and he really didn't like any of his kids, okay? It's almost hilarious how much he hated his own children. But during World War II, one of his children, I think it was his eldest son, was captured by the Nazis. Okay, and his eldest son was I don't know, a private in the Red Army. Stalin didn't want to give him any special treatment and make him like a commander at all. So his son gets captured by the Nazis. And Adolf Hitler, he never had any children, but Hitler had a nephew he really loved. And during a battle in World War II, Hitler's nephew gets captured by the Russians. So Hitler's nephew, I think, was a lieutenant, and Hitler really wanted his nephew back. So they sort of communicated with Stalin somehow, and it said, let's do a prisoner transfer. Hitler wants his nephew back. We'll give you your son back. Deal? And Stalin replies, a private is not worth a lieutenant. And they're like, but Stalin, this is your son. He's like, I know, and I don't care. And Stalin's son died in a concentration camp, and Hitler's nephew died in a Soviet prison. So that's just how hardcore this guy is. Don't mess with Joseph Stalin. Okay, that's what he looked like as a young man, and there he is on some Red Army stuff. Okay, so there were several times when Lenin was still the leader of the Soviet Union when people tried to kill him. A couple times, bullets actually got stuck in him, and he survived, but he was weak and not very capable of leading the country afterwards. And the Soviets always were like, Lenin, use bodyguards. Lenin, we'll put you in an armored car. But Lenin's whole vibe was, I want to show people communism. I want to be the same value as every other person in this country. I don't want all these special guards. I don't want to be treated differently. Well, anyway, he gets a bullet stuck in his neck, and over the next 2 years, he's slowly losing more and more of his health. Lenin actually did talk trash about Stalin, especially later on in his life. Lenin said this, Stalin has a personal rudeness, unnecessary roughness, a lack of finesse, flaws intolerable, and a secretary general. So Lenin obviously didn't really want Stalin to be the next guy in charge, but that's what's going to happen anyway. So boom, Lenin's getting shot, and Russia rising to the cause. So, this is where the story just gets wild. Stalin kills Trotsky and poisons Lenin. For most of history, we were a little concerned about the poisoning Lenin thing, but later on we did tests on Lenin's dead body and found that he was poisoned, and Stalin was the guy seeing him once a week. In 1924, Stalin becomes the supreme ruler of the Soviet Union, and he remains in that position for the rest of his life. He's going to be a big player in world politics all throughout World War II, even all the way up to the 1950s. And Stalin, he really wanted to start changing history. He wanted the narrative to say that Lenin founded the Soviet Union, but that he was Lenin's best friend. He was the leader of the Red Army during the Civil War, and that he was always situated to be guy number 2. So in order to do that, Stalin ordered his men to Photoshop. I mean, obviously computers didn't exist back then, but they found every single picture, a lot of the originals, and they cut out pieces of Trotsky, or they put ink on the photo, or they edited out Trotsky in various ways to make it appear that he never even existed. And how Trotsky dies is also a wild story. So once Stalin puts a target on Trotsky's head, Trotsky runs away to Mexico. And while he's in Mexico, he actually gets in a sexual relationship with this really famous Mexican artist, Frida Kahlo. And while he's chilling at Frida Kahlo's house, a Russian assassin finds him and kills him with an ice pick, of all things. Why do you have an ice pick in Mexico? I have big questions, but that's the reality of it. So, yep, Stalin kills Trotsky and poisons Lenin. Let's see what some of these pictures are, because some of the original pictures did survive, and then we also have the pictures that were spread around the Soviet Union in like Soviet Union history books. So it's interesting to see that Stalin wanted to change the narrative of the past. So here's Stalin hanging out with Lenin while he was sick. Stalin's, of course, poisoning Lenin slowly. Here's Lenin's dead body. It's still visible in Moscow to this day. Interesting fact. Yep, Stalin becomes the leader. And let's check out these two pictures. So here's the original. Okay, here's Vladimir Lenin, and here's Trotsky standing right next to him. But then the picture in the Soviet textbooks is, of course, Lenin right here, and Trotsky, he gone. All right, and then here's another one. This is the original picture. It's Lenin, and there's a couple people standing on the stairs. One of them's Trotsky. And the official photograph just shows Lenin with no one standing in the wings. So, Trotsky gone. Okay, so what does Stalin do once he takes over the country? He creates something called command economy communism. He says the government owns everything. I am going to decide how the supplies, how the material gets sent around the country. Stalin also does some things called the 5-year plans. This is a plan to industrialize Russia, to bring Russia up to a competitive level where it can make a lot of these fancy industries. And the 5-year plans generally work. I mean, he definitely does make Russia a more industrialized country, but the way he does it is by selling Russia's food for materials and supplies to build these factories. And because this command economy communism thing is happening, Stalin's guys take all the food from all the peasants in Russia, and the ones that sort of supported the Bolsheviks during the Civil War, he makes sure they get food back, but the ones that were part of like kind of the white Russians, he makes sure that they starve to death. And especially in 1932, interesting fact, 1932, the weather was great. Food grew all over Russia, especially in the Ukraine. But Stalin ordered his men to collect everyone's harvests, and then he trades a lot of it away to buy stuff for his industrialization plans. And as a result, 8 million Russians will die in the Great Famine. They will starve to death. But their farms worked. Food grew. It's just Stalin sold it all away. And, I mean, to give you some perspective, Hitler killed 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Right here, Stalin's already killed 8 million people from starving them to death. So this is pretty ridiculous stuff right off the bat. And Stalin's not even done, kids. Stalin's going to do some wild, wild stuff. So, 1932, Stalin takes the grain, leaves dead bodies. But he does build up Russia, makes a lot more factories. Yep, building it up. And then this says 5-year plan to crush capitalism. But yeah, as I said, Stalin purposely starved villages. And if people didn't starve to death, he would just have them killed. Another big thing Stalin decided to do was to create a system called gulags. Gulags are hard labor prison camps all the way off in Siberia, and I think there was an 80% chance if you were sent to a gulag, you were never seen again. The purpose of a gulag was basically to work someone to death, and because Siberia is so far away in the middle of nowhere, a lot of these gulags didn't even have walls. I mean, this picture one did. But it's like, okay, you want to escape, where are you going to go? There's no cities for 2,000 miles. We'll give you minimal amounts of food if you work, and if you get sick, if you get too tired, you'll just die. So that's pretty hardcore stuff. All right, that's life in a gulag life. And yep, 6 million perish in Soviet famine, peasants' crops seized, they ate their animals, they starve. Deliberate starvation of peasants, villages depopulated by hunger in Ukraine as Soviets punish their opponents. Ugh. Okay, and now, see, we're not even done. Now we get into the Great Purge. So once Stalin's a couple years into his rule now, some other of the Soviet leadership say, like, hey, we would like to be in charge too. Well, Stalin, he started to grow more and more paranoid that people would steal the leadership from him. So what Stalin did was he only had a few close friends, but everyone outside of that, all the people that were part of the original revolution, everybody who personally knew Lenin, personally knew Trotsky, he had them killed or gulagged. He'll go so far, he'll kill or gulag 4 million people in total. And so already right here, you have double the Holocaust numbers. And yeah, Stalin is just a terrible, terrible dude. Um, and once the Great Purge is finally done, he is secure and he is set as the leader of the Soviet Union for the next 25 years. And then what he does is he takes the money from the people and he builds himself a big old house. And he takes money from the people, buys himself a big fancy car, buys himself bodyguards, buys himself fancy food every night. He turned himself into a king, but he always talked about communism. But in reality, he was just a big crook. He was a big mob boss who just abused the country for his own power. So there really was now a two-class system in Russia. It was the working poor and the rich government or government party officials. So Stalin succeeded. He stole the country away. The Russian people wanted to get rid of their king, and they just ended up with another one. So let's check it out. Uh, Stalin, once again, if there was some person he didn't like, okay, like this is the original photograph right here. Let's imagine this dude is Comrade Stalin, I like you, you're so great, but you know what? Lenin and Trotsky were better. And now he's gone. Okay, like Stalin would just wipe you out of history. Not only would he kill you, he would make sure no one knew you ever existed. And then there they are, just murdering people, killing all kinds of people in the Soviet Union, and then piles and piles of bodies. Okay, it's just terrible, terrible stuff. I even remember reading this story in college that there was a guy who sort of worked for Stalin who went from city to city, and he wanted to see who didn't like Stalin, who didn't like Stalin's policies. And the way he did it was by putting on a comedy show where he would like insult Stalin. And then they would see the reaction. Like every time he made an insult on Stalin, if people laughed at his insults, other guys would look in the audience, take notes of whoever laughed, or they would take notes in the audience to look at people who were kind of pissed off about those jokes. And the people who were pissed off, they would be like given a reward, but the people who laughed, they would probably be gulagged or executed. So yeah, Stalin's rule over Russia made other countries think that Russia was really weak and fragile. I mean, Stalin has already killed 12 million people, starving everybody out. Other countries would observe his flaws and soon attempt to bring this Bolshevik revolution to an end. And that guy's name is Adolf Hitler. And we'll learn about that more next time. All right, peace out.